Welcome to Voices of Valor. You've just walked alongside Sergeant Jimmy O'Malley, a man who didn't seek glory, but chose grace. This is the heart of our channel: real soldiers, real humanity, and the quiet courage that rebuilds the world. If you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, hit subscribe, tap the bell, and join our mission. Because here, no act of kindness is too small. And no veteran's voice will ever be forgotten. In the quiet hills of western Pennsylvania, autumn 1945, Sergeant James Jimmy O'Malley stood at the edge of a freshly dug grave in St. Mary's Cemetery, his uniform still bearing the faint salt stains of Atlantic Ocean crossings. At 29, he'd survived Omaha Beach, the Hurtgen Forest, and the liberation of a small labor camp near Dachau, where he'd held the hand of a dying Polish boy named Lucas, who whispered, "Tell my sister I saw stars." Jimmy never found her. Now, back in his hometown of Johnstown, he carried that promise like a stone in his chest. He avoided parades, declined interview requests, and slept with the curtains drawn. His only solace was volunteering at the local VFW hall, where he'd quietly fix radios for elderly veterans or deliver groceries to widows of fallen soldiers. One rainy Tuesday, a letter arrived from Washington, D.C. The U.S. Army was returning personal effects recovered from Europe. Among them a small, water-stained sketchbook. Inside were drawings Lucas had made in the camp, birds, flowers, and one portrait of Jimmy, labeled "The American with Kind Eyes." That night, Jimmy made a decision. He would find Lucas's family. He sold his father's old Ford, packed a duffel bag, and boarded a train to New York, then a ship to Liverpool. His search led him through war-torn England, then to a displaced persons camp near Munich, where he met Elżbieta Nowacka, 17-year-old Polish girl who'd survived Ravensbrück and was now caring for orphans. "Lucas was my brother," she said, voice trembling. "He spoke of you every night." Jimmy handed her the sketchbook. She wept, but when he offered to take her to America, she shook her head. "My home is here, but I will rebuild it with hope, not hate." That moment changed Jimmy forever. Jimmy returned to Johnstown, not as a hero, but as a man with a mission. He used his G-Bill benefits not for college, but to buy a shuttered storefront on Main Street. With help from neighbors, he turned it into the Lantern House, a community center for veterans, refugees, and families rebuilding after loss. He hung Lucas's drawings on the walls. Every Saturday, he hosted story evenings, where World War II vets, Holocaust survivors, and returning Korean War soldiers shared meals and memories. Among the regulars was Rosa Alvarez, a Puerto Rican nurse who'd served in the Army Nurse Corps and now struggled with nightmares of field hospitals in Anzio. "You carry too much alone," Jimmy told her one evening, handing her a cup of chamomile tea. "Let us carry it with you." Slowly, the Lantern House became more than a building, it became a sanctuary. In 1950, when the Korean War draft began, young men from Johnstown came to Jimmy for advice. He never glorified war. Instead, he taught them, courage isn't about not being afraid. It's about doing what's right even when you're scared. He helped them write letters to their mothers, showed them how to tie proper knots, and reminded them to look for beauty even in hard places. When 19-year-old Tommy Kowalski shipped out to Pusan, Jimmy gave him a small compass. "So you always find your way back," he said. Tommy kept it in his breast pocket. He didn't survive Chosin Reservoir. But his last letter found in his pocket read, "Thanks for teaching me to see stars, even in snow." Jimmy wept. Then he framed the letter and kept teaching. By 1965, the Lantern House had become a beacon across Appalachia. Jimmy, now in his late 40s, partnered with local schools, teaching history not as dates and battles, but as lessons in empathy. He welcomed Vietnamese refugees after Saigon fell, offering language lessons and job leads. Among them was Minh Tran, a former schoolteacher from Da Nang, whose wife and son had died in a bombing raid. "I have nothing left," Minh told Jimmy one winter night. Jimmy placed a hand on his shoulder. "You have your voice." And that's enough to start. Together, they started a literacy program for immigrant children. Jimmy also began writing letters not just to families of the fallen, but to active duty soldiers. He'd send care packages with socks, chocolate, and handwritten notes. "You are seen. You matter." One day, a young woman named Claire Bennett walked into the Lantern House. She was a journalism student from Penn State, researching quiet heroes of World War II. Over weeks of interviews, she uncovered Jimmy's full story: the boy in Dachau, the sketchbook, The Decades of Silent Service. She wanted to publish it. Jimmy refused at first. "This isn't about me," he said, but Claire insisted. "It's about what we owe each other after war." Reluctantly, he agreed. The article, titled "The Man Who Carried Stars Home," ran in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette in 1967. Overnight, letters poured in from veterans, teachers, even a nun in Warsaw, who claimed to know Lukasz's cousin. Jimmy answered everyone. In 1985, on the 40th anniversary of V-Day, Jimmy O'Malley stood on the steps of the Lantern House, now a registered non-profit with branches in 3 states. At 69, his hair was white, his steps slower, but his eyes still held that quiet kindness Lukasz had sketched decades before. Beside him stood Min Tran, now a high school principal, and Claire Bennett, who'd become a historian at the Library of Congress. They unveiled a new wing, the Star Room, filled with letters, drawings, and compasses donated by veterans and their families. "We don't heal war," Jimmy told the crowd. "But we can heal each other." That evening, alone in his office, Jimmy opened a drawer and pulled out Lukasz's final sketch, "The Stars over Dachau." He touched the paper gently. "I kept my promise," he whispered. A week later, he passed peacefully in his sleep, surrounded by photos of those he'd helped. At his funeral, hundreds came, veterans of every war, refugees from a dozen nations, students who'd learned to read in his center. On his casket rested a single compass and a child's drawing of 2 men under a sky full of stars. Today, the Lantern House still stands, and every new volunteer is given the same words Jimmy once gave Tommy Kowalski: "Look for the stars. And help others find them too, because in the end, the greatest victory isn't on the battlefield, it is in the quiet acts of kindness that outlive us all."